I speak to you in the name of the one holy and living God. Wisdom, knowledge, faith, healing, working of miracles, prophecy, discernment of spirits, speaking and interpreting various languages. Oh, there are many gifts. In just a few paragraphs following today's text from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, we find even more gifts: apostles, teachers, deeds of power, forms of assistance, forms of leadership. And if you've not yet heard your gift mentioned, not to worry. Paul has more lists. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he adds gifts of ministering, exhortation, generosity, leading, compassion, and cheerfulness. That's a good one. And to those, he adds two more in his letter to the Ephesians: evangelists and pastors. Turns out just about anything that anyone does for the good of others ranks among those gifts given to humanity. But here's the thing. Rather than being grateful recipients of these unearned treasures and generously, lavishly distributing them for the good of others, all too often, some of us identify with our gifts. We now presume to be the source of the gifts and rather exploit them to enhance our own personal power, privilege, or pleasure. And others of us go a different direction. We fall into a different pit, denying our gifts, hiding them under a proverbial basket, allowing them to dissipate and disappear. So let's talk about gifts. Translated from the Greek word charisma, gifts are these favors that we receive that are unearned, without merit, and with no recompense. But you see, charisma also is translated as grace. Grace, which refers to God's impelling goodness in relationship with humankind. Gifts and grace. You see, we come to understand that our gifts are outward and visible expressions of God's inward activation of grace. Two sides of one coin: grace and gifts, gifts and grace. Think of it this way. God's grace is like a seed planted at the center of our hearts. Feel that? And when we bring our heads to our hearts, the river of consciousness opens the way for the seed of grace to flow and scratch the surface of our awareness. When grace rises to conscious awareness, we are illumined. And with our minds illumined by grace, we are ignited. We are on fire, and we feel compelled to allow that grace to flow through us. And the way it flows through us is in the form of each of our particular gifts. I believe this is what Paul means when he writes, "Now there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. The same God activates all of the gifts in everyone." God activates the unique gifts in each of us that are already there. All that is required of us is to turn our attention around and bring our heads into our hearts, so to open the way for grace to flow, delivering our gifts to consciousness and into fruition in the world. So the question before us is this: how do we bring our heads into our hearts so to open the way for grace to flow through us. Well, I believe we begin with our heads. We decide we want to do it. Isn't that where most things start? We affirm our intention to be the vessels through which God's grace flows. And then we turn our attention to our hearts. And by directing our attention to the center of our chest, really feeling that, you can feel that right now if you try, the core of our being, the intention of our head becomes the passion of our heart. And we can hear ourselves saying, it is the deepest desire of my heart to allow the grace of God to flow through me. Who here does not want the grace of God to flow through you? I mean, really. And you see, herein lies the incredible promise that the deepest desire of our hearts is not other than God's deepest desire for us. And so when we draw our heads into our hearts and align our will in the will of God, we are at one in the will of God. And grace like a river flows naturally to illumine our minds and deliver our gifts. People, it's effortless. It all becomes effortless. And here's another thing about gifts. They're meant to be given away. I mean, when's the last time you went out, bought the perfect gift, wrapped it, tied a gorgeous ribbon on it, put it in a box, sealed the box, put that box in another box, sealed that box, and put it in a closet? You know, that's not what we do with gifts. Gifts are meant to be given away, but not only given away for the good of others. Paul says, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit, the gift. And here's the important phrase, for the common good. Not for me, not for my benefit, not for my adulation, but for you, for the common good. Why so many of us are so different with different gifts? Because the common good needs all of our gifts. Every single one of our gifts count. One is not better than the other. They are all needed. Well, last week, everyone who was present received a blessing envelope like this one, with an invitation to go out of your way to find someone with whom you would not ordinarily interact, to pass on the blessing. And then to think of two ways in which the grace of God, the blessings, could flow through you to other people. Well, several of you have done so and told me about it as I invited you to, and have put it in this crystal bowl. This is my preach from crystal bowl. For those of you who don't know that, I do this from time to time. And today I'm going to do that. I'm going to preach the rest of this sermon from your stories. So let me pull this out and see what someone had to say. This week I kept a few $5 bills in my car, and when stopped for a traffic light, will give them to whomever is standing there. I will now put each bill in a blessing envelope, as this will be a more important message. I did try to give a blessing envelope to my bank teller, but she said it was company policy. She could not accept it. Okay. She was touched by my gesture. Maybe for some it's the thought of the blessing that is more than enough. I think it's important to be blessed and to be a blessing. And a physical object doesn't always have to accompany it. I always love it when people bless me, because I sure need it. And it's usually with their words, with their eyes, with their stories. So how many ways can we bless people without stuff? Can we be present with them? Not be talking too much? Listen to their stories? Sit next to them when they're feeling down, visit them when they're not well, be present when they die. These are ways of being blessings without having to give something. This is sent to me by a woman who was visiting here last week. She writes, I wanted to let you know what happened to the giving envelope. I met a young gal on my flight home named Michelle. Michelle was visiting Tucson. She was an au pair for a family a while back, on her way back to Europe. I passed the blessing along to her with a note. I told her to buy herself some dinner, a cup of coffee, while she was in Chicago airport. I like to think that this blessing has gone from Tucson to Chicago to Austria. Well, how about that? We never know how far our blessings will travel and how that blessing will touch Michelle and how Michelle will then pass that blessing on to another. It's like the story of the casting of the seeds. You throw out many seeds, and you never know where they're going to land. Some of them land in cracks, and some of them land on fertile ground. But we cast them far, and we cast them wide. Let's see. Here's another one. While eating in a restaurant, I was served by a brand new waitress. It was her first day, and she was very young, lacked self-confidence. My envelope had $10 in it, so I gave it to her as a tip. She was shocked and pleased. I hope it builds her self-confidence. And then it goes on to say, another blessing I passed on as a volunteer at a spay-neuter clinic, drawing and logging anesthesia jugs for the animals. I think that one speaks to gifts. I happen to know this particular person is a retired nurse, and so has the gift of healing and caring, and has allowed this gift to continue to flow through her in the spay-neuter clinics. I know I look out there and I know that we have teachers, and preachers, and leaders, and nurses, and engineers, and administrators, and bankers, and people of all different stripes. How are the gifts that are given to you continuing to find their way into the world? How are you allowing the grace that has been so generously given to you to be spread out for the good of all? Let's do one more. Okay. My future husband and I pulled into a parking lot. We watched a young woman cross the lot carrying a baby in a carrier with 3 little girls, the oldest not more than 4 or 5. I said to my partner, I hope she is babysitting. That is a lot of children. We laughed, went into the dollar store, and lo and behold, there she was, patiently walking with the little ones, encouraging them to pick out their favorite thing. And I remembered the envelope in my purse. Felt kind of weird to approach a stranger, but I did. Told her how we had seen her in the parking lot, and the remark that my partner made, she laughed, "Oh, they are all mine." I complimented her on her well-behaved children and gave her the envelope. I told her I did not have a clue what was in it, but that our church was doing a little project of being a light in the world during the season of Epiphany. I looked at her and gave the blessing to her and her little ones. And she looked at me a little strange, said thank you, and walked away. From the next aisle, I can hear the oldest ask, "What is it, Mommy?" "I don't know. A blessing," she answered, "but we will open it when we get home." What did that child learn? What did she learn about strangers? What did she learn about waiting? Receiving a blessing, holding on to it, and allowing it to come to fruition later. I believe these are all things that we could learn